Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Blind Ambition with Jack Kelly. It's Rick, and today we have William Adams. We're excited to have William on the show. He was most recently the technical advisor to the CTO at Microsoft. Now he is primarily focused on really developing and spending time as an award winning diversity and inclusion innovator, an engineering trailblazer, and a philanthropist. And hopefully, we can dive into all of these good nuggets that you're working on, William.
I'm all for it.
That's a great intro, right?
It's a great intro.
So how much of an amazing technologist do you have to be the advisor
Right.
to the CTO, right? So like you're not the CTO, but you're like advising the CTO. That's like big time, right?
Yeah, well, it's kind of funny. I mean, let's see, we opened that office in, I think it was 2017. So Kevin Scott, who we got through LinkedIn, is the CTO. And in 2017, I got this email, I think it was 2017, it might have been 16, saying, hey, would you consider, being technical advisor to the CTO? And just, Microsoft doesn't always have a CTO. And I was like, is this one of those spam emails? What is this?
Did you really think that? Yeah.
Like, I didn't even know we had a CTO. So he was just getting started in that role because he got, came over with LinkedIn and then is like, oh, what are we going to do with this guy who was the VP of engineering at LinkedIn? So yeah, I was the first technical advisor, and the role is easily summarized as your job is to synthesize. Kevin's role is to drive the direction of the company technically, right? Like to look out into the future and know what our goals are and all that, and say, well, technologically, we should be doing the following, therefore we should invest in AI, for example. So yeah, my job is to, just like with Supreme Court justices, they don't read and write everything. They have pages and assistants and blah, blah, blah. So the TA role is like that. It's like you go out and survey a broad swath of stuff, and then you synthesize that and hand some opinions and say, well, I think we should do this. And then some cases you go and execute, right? That's really what it takes. So I think I got in that role because I've been at that point at the company, at least 20 years. And I've done several technical things, and my name got dropped in a hat because it's a nomination sort of thing. And there you go.
Right? I mean, surely it was more than that. I sense a lot of humility coming from you right now, William.
Well, there's other TAs, so I'm not the only one. And TA sticks with you after, just like I was president, and they always call me president. So, okay, I've done some kick-ass stuff, and I've done it very well, and I have a lot of respect within the company, and that's how I landed in such a role.
So you've had over 35 years of software engineering experience. Can you walk us through,
all 35 years?
We'll start with the first
almost, yeah.
Like, get your popcorn.
This podcast would be 5 hours. So
of just like how the industry has changed over that time, right? How, or maybe even spending time at Microsoft.
Okay, so in the beginning there was Fred and Barney, and we were out in our little,
Well, 35 years ago, it was the punch cards, right? There was.
Yeah, it was right at the edge of the punch cards. So let's see, I'm 57. So when I first learned programming was on a Commodore PET, which I so happen to have got a Commodore 64 sitting under my desk right now because I bought it off eBay because
amazing
nostalgia. But anyway, in the very beginning, I just self-taught. I learned machine language programming on a Commodore PET, and assembly language, and ultimately basic programming. And then in my neighborhood where I lived in Southern California was Rockwell International, and they had a program where they brought in high school students to learn engineering, and they taught us Fortran. And at that time, can't remember, I think those were key punch cards, right? And then off to college I went, UC Berkeley, and the very first year it was still key punch on cards, and you handed your cards to someone and they stuck them in a hopper, and your job was compiled and it ran, and they gave you a printout of whatever it is that your program did, right? There's no terminal and all that sort of stuff. You're just there on the key punch thing. PDP-11, flipping switches on the front of a computer. You know, that was the first year. By the second year, it was already terminals, VAX, computers, and no more key punch, no more line printers. So it went pretty quick. But there was no, let's see, yeah, right back then, so it's 1980s, so 80, 82, 83, 84, birth of Apple, birth of Atari, birth of TRS-80, you know, all that stuff, right? All those early personal computers were coming out then, and I had my Commodore 64 by then. So it's just that, and we learned programming in school, kind of, but it was really just an adjunct to doing hardware design, right? It's like I was EECS, so electrical engineering, computer science, and yeah, there was a C course and there was a Pascal course, but you know, it was only to teach you so that you could do the hardware. It wasn't like hardcore in programming in C. I mean, C you learned in a weekend. You know, you read the little page that they printed. I was like, oh, here's the syntax for C. Now go do some stuff. What we really need is some, you know, you need to control these lights on this hardware. So it was, the early days were like that, but it was also the heyday of like, we're gonna build the world, right? All bushy-eyed or wide-eyed and bushy-tailed, because it was the birth of Sun Microsystems and MIPS and SGI, all those companies that are no longer, right? Except Apple. They made it through. So yeah, that was the earliest days, was just, you know, making hay, right? It's like the world's our oyster, we can do anything, right? And all those companies were birthed around that time, early 80s.
Willie, you know, what do you think of this? The older I get, the more I see sometimes people are like in the right place at the right time when it comes to their career.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you were in, not to take anything away from your skills and ability, but like you were in the right place at the right time, that you had Rockwell and they had a program and the school was set up for it.
Yeah.
I think the same thing happened with Bill Gates too, right? Where he went to a school that happened to have, you know, a program for computing, and he just fell in love with it. But if you were born in Idaho, or if you were born in, you know, Wisconsin, chances are you would never have that opportunity.
Although Gateway Computers, they were out in the middle of somewhere in some field, and they were.
Oh, that was the one with the like the cow motif,
cows,
right?
Yeah. So it just depends. And I so happened to have an uncle who worked for the Navy, who so happened to be able to give me a Commodore PET. Right? Brilliant. I was the only kid in my neighborhood for blocks and blocks and miles who had a computer at home. Right? So yeah, you're right. There's a certain amount of just, you fell in the right place at the right time with the right resources. There's some counters to that. I also had the wrong color skin at the time. So that was a kind of a downward pressure. But I did land in several places where it's like right place, right time. I met Steve Jobs. We did stuff with him at Next Computers. You know, I did the Macintosh thing. I sold Macs. Everything. I was at the right school, UC Berkeley. So I was in the Bay Area. I was going to go to UC Irvine, but it's like, oh, Berkeley, I've never heard of that. Why don't I go there? Luck. It was just, it's like, oh, okay. If they hadn't sent me a letter, I never would have applied. I never would have gotten into that whole computer scene. Right? Amazing. I wouldn't have met Steve Jobs, none of that. So,
all right, you glossed over this twice now, Rick, right? He just subtly, it's like, Steve Jobs, Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
So what's any interesting stories?
Well, because for me, it's ancient history, but yeah, there's a whole computer history museum thing that was done on me and my brother, and it's you can go check it out. It's on the interwebs, the Computer History Museum in Silicon Valley. And there was a 7-hour segment that they did verbal, what do they call oral history, right? And it was all about our days in Silicon Valley. So we talked about just everything from the beginning to about the time that I hit Microsoft. And there's a huge section in there was about Next Computers and Steve Jobs interactions and stuff like that. So yeah, we were early pioneers in the Next ecosystem. small as it was. And we did a lot of the custom software development. So when Steve Jobs talked about mission critical custom apps, he was talking about the kind of stuff that we did. Because at that time, we really transformed it. It's stuff that you would today say, of course, what's the big deal? But it's things as simple as we could develop an enterprise app. And we did this in real estate, and we did it in a couple of other areas. I could develop an app within a couple of months, or even a couple of weeks. And at that time, and these were slick UI apps, at that time, it was literally a year to develop some interesting app like that. So Next, and the way they did their graphic user interface and the way their app kit worked and all that sort of stuff, and some ingenuity we threw at it, it's like, look, we're talking days to prototype, weeks to implement, not months and years. And that just flipped it, right? So we did stuff like that, and helped them land some major sales like the William Morris Talent Agency, the LA County Sheriffs, the Air Force, stuff like that, where they just tried us out. It was like, these guys can do custom apps, So that was the Steve Jobs era. I mean, he was, you can hear a lot about Steve Jobs. Oh, he was a real hard ass. He was mean to people and all that. Not with us. I mean, he was like, we were just level. It's like, okay, you don't need to be the showman for us. Let's just talk about what needs to get done here, right? So that was Steve Jobs.
How hard was it to sell back then? Going to these different places where it still was new. Did you get like a lot of pushback? Did people think like, what are you talking about? I don't even understand it.
I mean, I mean, you're talking Next computers. So it was such a small niche market thing. So you're really relying on Steve Jobs' personality, right? Steve Jobs was the sale, because at that time he was still very popular in the industry, very well known, all that sort of stuff. So really, and that's what people buy. He shows up, does his dog and pony, and they're like, I don't know. And we said this in the interview, I don't know what he's selling, but it's Steve Jobs and we're buying. That's pretty much how it was. And then we would follow up with actual stuff that's like, oh, and this stuff actually works. So it wasn't me selling, it was Steve Jobs selling and me backing it up with the reality, right?
Is that kind of correlated to like back in the 50s or so with IBMs, and no one would lose their job if they bought absolutely. IBM? So
it's like, how could you go wrong betting on Steve Jobs, right? Yeah. Celebrity. And we don't really have that as much. I'm just trying to think through who are the execs these days. Elon Musk is the closest that has that kind of cachet, right? All the other people out there, any CEO you can think of is like, not really. No, I don't think so. So I think Musk is the only one at this point. It's like that.
I have to ask, like right now we're at this, in terms of the tech industry, it's almost at this odd kind of crossroads, right? There are folks that are trying to, ring the bell like Paul Revere and saying, the metaverse is coming, Web3 is coming. I mean, you see different stages of people trying to make things. Yeah. What is the future of the tech industry? Are we really on this kind of cusp of Web 2.0, Web 3.0, or?
Well, I'll tell you this. If you have to give the thing a name and promote it, that's not the thing.
Okay.
When we were developing what we now call Web 2.0, we weren't sitting there going, we're creating Web 2.0. It's going to be awesome. It's like, no, we created like Ajax and this thing called JSON and, WebSockets. And suddenly a set of applications were enabled. And then later we said, oh, that's Web 2.0, right? Now you got people, it's like Web 3.0. And we went through the last couple of years saying, oh, it's all about crypto. It's all about this. It's all about that. It's like, chill, man. Let's just take a breather, take a step back. The metaverse, well, okay, we've been here before. It was called SimCity, And I forgot the other one. I remembered this just recently and then I forgot it again. Anyway, we've already had the simulated environment thing. The technology was not ready for it. And here we are again, right? I had this conversation with my brother where we're talking about the metaverse and Web 3.0 last year. And he just kind of like, I'm not sure about this. Now, mind you, my brother and I have been technologists for 40 years. I'm not sure about this. Isn't it just the internet? It's like, yeah, but with better goggles. So you have to take a step back and say, well, what is the metaverse? I mean, realistically, sure, it's about visuals, but we already have that or don't have that. People aren't just going to put goggles on their face and that's it. Not now. Yeah, we're not there yet. But they're going to do online transactions. Well, we can already do that, right? Let's make it easier. Okay, great. And we're going to have digital real estate. Really, whatever. You know, I mean, we went through a phase of doing that before as well. So, but the technologies around it, blockchain, ignoring all the not good coins, distributed ledgers. Well, that's a piece of technology that's very interesting because it enables all sorts of things. NFTs. Well, couldn't we just represent house titles with NFTs and then use those and eliminate half the escrow process, right? Yeah, that seems good. So when you pick at the pieces, it's like, oh, there's a lot of little nuggets in here. If they keep growing and flourishing, we're going to have something. And in hindsight, we'll look back at it and call it something. We'll call it Web 3.0. Maybe we'll call it the metaverse. I doubt it. That's marketing from Facebook because Facebook is such a crap word now. So I think the technologies that are emerging are going to be there and something's going to happen. I don't think it's going to be any of the stuff that is currently being marketed as Web 3.0. That's what I would say.
I mean, when you look at the companies today, the huge giants, you know, Google, Meta, Facebook, are there any signs that they might be like the companies of the original Silicon Valley of like the 80s where
how could they be? How could they be? How
really?
could they be? Right? So Google, what, 20 years ago, Google emerged?
Right. Early 2000s.
At that time, we were into I forgot what the Lycos or something like that. There were a number of Yahoo search, you know. I mean, Google, what the heck is that? Who thought that would be? Wouldn't we have thought that Yahoo would be the dominant player by now, or even further, AOL? I mean, what's this Google thing? I mean, what is a Google anyway? It's just some big number. So evolution always, evolution, sure, you know, and IBM's still kicking around, but revolution never comes from the incumbents, right? I mean, Microsoft is managed to stick around. Apple had a revival, you know, and you could say that, and they didn't even invent the cell phone, right? They just did it better. Steve Jobs came along and said, what if we put these three things together? You know, and he used his Steve Jobs reality distortion field, and we all went, "Oh my God!" You know, and now we all have these things. Yeah. You know, it's like, oh, I'm awash in Apple products. It's so sad. So I think it's hard to look at current incumbents, especially the multi-trillion-dollar companies, and say, what are they going to do next? It's going to be so emergent and be around in 20 years. Like, we're about making dollars now, right? That's what shareholders demand, and that's what we're optimized for. And that goes for Apple too. They'll evolve rather than revolutionize more than anything else, because that's the way the market works. It's hard. So I think the player that's going to be dominant in the next 20 years, we haven't seen yet. That's what I think. I don't think it's going to be any one of us who are dominant now.
Really, that's an interesting. But you know, it's so funny because if we had this conversation only 6 months ago, I was like, what? But now watching TikTok and how it's well, I think it's what, larger than YouTube now in terms of viewers, perhaps. And it's really taking market share from Facebook. So yeah, so like your point is well taken. But if we had this conversation not too long ago, these are they're so firmly entrenched.
Juggernauts, man.
It's like impossible.
You can't knock them out. No way.
But I guess it's doable, right?
Where's IBM?
Right.
And you can do this little exercise. At Berkshire Hathaway, they do this exercise where they show a chart of like, who were the dominant players in the stock market 50 years ago, 30 years ago? You know, it's like, it's never anyone who's there today.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like the steel companies, right?
Yeah, steel companies, industrialists. And it's like, oh my God, US Steel is going to be there forever. It's like, maybe not.
Right.
So, you know, you have to, history doesn't stop. And these trends continue. So it's no different.
Yeah, I guess when you're in it, right? Like when you're in the moment, you think that's it. And you can't imagine how you can get something to disrupt it, because it's hard to figure, how do you disrupt a Google or an Amazon at this point?
Because something new comes along.
But I guess there is always something new. I guess that's one of the cool things about this country. Like we're so entrepreneurial.
Not even the country. Forget this country. The world, man. So take a trip to Africa, and what you'll see there, in particular Kenya and Nigeria, what you'll see there is two things. One is they didn't lay copper everywhere. So they don't have phone lines in the ground. They're all mobile, right? Everything's mobile. Their payment system is all on your phone. Micropayments, whatever. You can go to a merchant on the street selling bananas, and you can do a micropayment exchange with them from your phone. All right. They're pioneering fintech like no one's business. That kind of stuff will not come from the US because we don't need it. Right. We've all got, you know, bank ATM cards, credit cards, blah, blah, blah. They don't have all that stuff. They don't trust the banks. They're unbanked. Right. So they need the equivalent, the moral equivalent of being able to pull a musty old dollar out of your pocket and give it to somebody, but it's digital, right? So they're inventing all manner of payment systems out there in the hinterlands. And we're just like, I went there a couple of years ago. Now we have an office there. And, you know, you look at them, it's like, damn, you know, they kind of going on. What is that going to turn into in a few more years? You know, they're pioneering in blockchain because they don't trust payment systems. It's not the US that's going to drive it. It's going to be people like that. So yeah, who knows what's going to happen.
Is that the same in other locations too, outside the US and kind of developing nations where they're building it in a way, I don't want to say from scratch, but they don't have to do what what let's say you did when you started out. And it's going to be a different model, but it's going to be a successful model, I guess, right?
Yeah, I mean, look at what you have. So when I got started, we didn't even have the internet, right? So forget that. That didn't exist. And yet we birthed Sun Microsystems and Silicon Graphics and also all manner of companies, Apple. This is all pre-internet. Then the internet came along, and we, in the last 10, 20 years, birthed a whole bunch of internet-based companies. Now let's just roll forward another few years where Starlink is ubiquitous. You know, everyone in the hinterland is connected to the internet. Now farmers can get product to market without going through middlemen because they can check prices, spot prices instantly, and reroute logistics such that the truck that is 20 miles away comes by their farm, picks up their yams and takes them to market and gets them the best price. So I think that there's a combination of ubiquity of certain kinds of technologies, like access to the internet, which is slowly coming, you know, like never before. And then there's also the sensor data everywhere. And when you look at Kenya, like I mentioned, they didn't put copper in the ground. They had Safaricom, which is their local telco, put everyone, even in the slums, they have 5G connections on smartphones, right? That's an enabler. If you kind of squint, you can say China is also an emerging market. They're not really anymore, but they build stuff differently too. It's all mobile payments and, you know, deliver to your home systems and all that they've had for years, way before we did in the US. So I think you have this in every place where if you assume that ingenuity is evenly spread, you're going to come up with these kinds of solutions because people want, right? And once they have access to the technology to enable them, because more and more things are available digitally, that genius is going to leverage that technology, and interesting things are going to happen because they're going to have perspectives and experiences that we don't have. And we'll just kind of go, oh, look at that. Isn't that interesting? Right? It's just stuff that we can't think of because we're not in their situation.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, yeah, that's going to happen all over the place.
Do you think for people who are on the blind platform and other technologists that maybe it would behoove, the more intrepid, forward-looking, progressive people to say, hey, maybe move to Kenya, maybe move to some of these locations and say, hey, if I can get in, maybe not the ground floor, but the second floor, third floor, maybe it is
Certainly,
greater growth.
I think it's a humbling experience to go into the world with an eye to learning, right? I don't want to live in Kenya, but I certainly would love to go spend half a year there hanging out with people in the fintech space, right? And then take those learnings and try to come up with, my own sort of thing. So the key for Americans, and this is a challenge for Americans, is we're so imperialistic because we've been on top for so long, we think that no one else can innovate like us. And it's just not true, right? So it's good to go and become humble. I went into the slums of Kibera, which is in Kenya, and talked to people there. And talk about an eye-opening experience like, oh, you have a master's degree in mechanical engineering. You're in this slum, but that's just circumstance. You're a pretty smart person. What do you think should be happening in the world? So I think for Americans, it's hardest for us because we're so imperial, so capitalistic, so patronizing. It's hard to put all that down and open up your mind to new experiences and new perspectives, right? So yeah, I don't think you growing up here in the US can go to a place like Kenya and make it, because those people hustle. Unlike us, they hustle way more than you can possibly muster, right? So you can go and learn, but I don't think you're going to go in there and say, oh, I'm from the US. Now let me show you how it's done. It's like, yeah, right. Stick to the side, But it's great to go and learn if you can be humble enough to open your mind to newer experiences. That's what I think.
Pulling on that thread a little bit in terms of like the hustle, right? In the last 2 years, we've seen a lot of tech companies kind of come to this sudden realization. Maybe it's out of necessity, maybe it's out of, opportunity of, hey, I don't have to just hire software engineers and pay them, 400K, 500K in the San Francisco Bay Area. That there's no monopoly on great talent, on, technical expertise. I mean, are we going to see some like downward pressure on compensation as companies start to hire overseas or even outside of, California, Seattle, or New York?
Yeah. What do you think?
Well, we talked to Rick, we talked to the guys at what's the Angels List that's exactly doing that, and then Deal is doing it, remote.com is doing it. They're just picking off these great people from Kenya and all these other countries and saying, hey, you can stay where you are and we'll pay you X, and you're going to be a software engineer for us. So it's
I think
booming, right?
Absolutely. I think it's kind of a different kind of globalization, isn't it? Because we went through these phases of offshoring, right? We sent a bunch of work to India, and Microsoft has done this in the past. It's like, oh, hey, let's open up a development center in India or China, and let's exploit the wage difference, right? 3 to 1. And we still do this today in different regions. But realistically, and that was one way. And then you have, like you said, the Silicon Valley. It's like, oh, if you relocate to Silicon Valley, you can get all this money and pay it all in rent. So you have that as well, but you're absolutely right. Everybody in the world is going to be able to program. Why? Because with the internet, high-speed internet, I can actually check in code while I'm in Kenya on a beach, so that's not a barrier. But I think there's going to be even, there's one more click to that that's going to really drive the pressure. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this thing called Copilot. It's this technology that my code's in GitHub. And if my code's in GitHub and I use the Visual Studio editor, Visual Studio Code, I can type comments and it'll fill in the code automatically. So I can type a comment that says, line drawing routine, and it'll go and fill up 20 lines of code that is how to draw. I can say,
is that like they call like no code? Is that when they refer to no code, where you can kind of do it like you're talking about?
Slightly different. That's like, that's slightly different. That's more like, oh, I'm an Excel programmer and I can not write too much code. I can drag and drop. This is, I'm a professional programmer and I know what I need to do. And I can just type the comment of what I need to do. Implement Breslin line drawing routine. And it'll go bam and put like 20, 30 lines of code there. And I'll look at it and go, oh yeah, other than this one thing right here, that's exactly what I needed. So what you're seeing is, and the way they do that is they look at all the code of GitHub.
Right.
And they say, well, I've seen Breslin before. I think he means this, and they'll go, bam. Now that's just simple copy and paste. It's going to get more intelligent where I can say, I need a fast line drawing routine because I'm going to deploy it on an Android phone. And I'll go, oh, okay, that's very more specific, and bam. So what I'm getting at is me going like this for $400,000 a year. That job is going away. Forget globalization. That job is just going away because you will be able to just talk to some machine. And because AI is advancing, forget about the global talent, AI is advancing, and you'll be able to just talk. As long as you can converse and articulate what you want, the AI is going to be able to write the code. The code is like code. Who writes code?
Wait a minute.
That's for the machine.
Well, I just want to ask you, when you say you, do you mean like just the novice, someone like not even a novice,
Yes.
a layman like myself?
Yes.
Wow.
Right? And I'm not talking 20 years out.
Because like right now, this is what they're talking with Dolly, right? And this artificial intelligence to draw these paintings.
So let's go one step further with Dolly. You know what Dolly does? You type, I want to see a cat on a horse in space, and bam, there you go. Now Dolly can do that because it just kind of mashes pictures together. It's not a hell of a lot of understanding, but you look at it as a human, you go, it looks like a cat on a horse in space.
Right.
The code for a machine needs to be a little bit more precise. So you do want Dolly for machines where you can say, I need a sensor network system that's going to run on this kind of device and blah, blah, blah. And it needs to get very precise about that, right? But it's going to be able to, right? It's going to be able to. The translation from voice to command is easy. That's a solved problem. We've been doing that for years. So it's not the voice to text part, that's easy. It's the model behind it where you say, okay, he said sensor network. What is a sensor? Well, we're training and sensor is this, and it has these inputs, and it has this sort of parameters, and here's how you program it. And here's 50 different examples of how you program a sensor, right? So the same Copilot code that could show me how to draw a line, I could say, talk to this kind of sensor, and I'll go, bam, here you go. I didn't write any code. Right? I just had to articulate what it is that I wanted to happen. Right.
I still have to digest this because this sounds just like such a game changer.
Because we got more to go.
Because this is a game changer. So let's say Rick and I, Rick's a PR person. So let's say he wants to build a platform of all PR people for whatever reason, right?
Yeah.
So that means he doesn't have to now hire a whole bunch of software developers to do it.
Yeah.
He could kind of just say, hey, I need a platform to do, PR people in the fintech space and what have you.
Right. And you'll get very specific. and if you think conversationally, it's like, well, what is the conversation when you try to do this with the supposed software engineer or expert system designer? The conversation is like, well, how many people are going to use the system? How are they going to access it? How fast does it have to be? How much do you want to spend on it? You know, this is all just inputs that you're giving the model, if you will, and it's going to go, okay, well, here you go. And you're going to go, thank you. And then you're going to move on to the next task.
That's crazy.
Not once will you talk to someone like me earning $400,000 a year.
This is
The
wild.
machine's going to do it. So yes, to answer your question, there is going to be downward pressure on salaries as it spreads out and the AIs come in. And what's going to be super important and why you're still going to pay me $400,000 is because somebody has to create the models in the back end for a while,
Sure.
right? And somebody has to know how to clearly create those conversational interactions because the AI is kind of dumb these days. And someone's going to have to bring philosophy, sociology, psychology, because you don't want the machines to dominate us humans. So somebody has to be back there saying, when he means do it fast, he means, and don't kill the human.
Well, that's a good point. See, that's a really interesting point, because it's almost like you being the advisor to the chief technology officer. You need someone who's creative, who's innovative, who has empathy, who has, you know, empathy, all those qualities, right? All those qualities to make sure that they don't run amok or go afoul from what you're doing. So on one side,
let's talk about diversity.
Yeah. So like on one side, it changes it, but the other side, you do need that human component.
You need more of the human component, less of this component. You don't need this mechanical component. You need more of the human component. So that's why going forward, I care more about who you are as a human, your empathy, right? Do you care about other humans?
Right.
Because so far we've had a
because it's what the human gives into it.
Now you're excited.
Because it's blowing my mind. Because I think I'm understanding. So like you need humans who could, you know, give the information, because like it's only as good as the information you give. And if you get like a jerk who's giving information, it's going to be bad. If you're going to get
garbage in, garbage
information,
out.
it's going to be really bad. So you got to make sure.
Right. And right now we're just trundling through the field because we got things like, oh, we got these AIs. So they're making, you know, amateur mistakes like, how come the face recognition couldn't recognize anyone who was black? You know, because you trained it on a bunch of white guys with beards, of course. So, you know, that's child's play.
Right.
Roll that forward. Why is it that all of these missiles suddenly destroyed that society over there? Because somebody didn't have empathy, you know. It's like, oops, my bad. So yeah, it's getting really important. Right? It's not about the mechanical smashing keys on the keyboard.
No, is this here?
Get to the next layer.
But is this here now, or like it's like a couple of years to really?
Well, my dear lobster, yes, it's here now.
Even for morons like myself,
you're not a moron, so you're exactly who we should be serving. So the technologies. This is the thing about technologies, because one of the things we don't realize is, you know, we look at Moore's law, for example. If you heard Moore's law, doubling of, you know, either processing power or reduction in the size every couple of years. That hasn't really gone away, and people have given it technical, like, well, you know, Moore's law is dead because the size is. It was like, look, we're still on an exponential growth curve in terms of computing power and reduction in the amount of the size and the amount of watts required to do the same thing, right? I have more computers out of reach, but okay, let's take this one. All right, your standard iPhone. Supercomputer 50 years ago. It's in my freaking pocket. That used to be a warehouse. 50 years. Right. Within my lifetime, because I'm 57, this supercomputer got in my pocket, and all I'm doing on it is taking pictures. You know?
Right.
So I have this it's a paper theory that talks about ubiquitous computing, and it's about the density of compute power. And when it reaches a tipping point, you have emergent things that happen, right? We all have supercomputers, right? If they were all talking to each other, trying to solve a problem, things that get solved faster. With the number of sensors, compute modules, speakers, all these sorts of things, you're just going to reach a point, and we're already there. We're just kind of slowly walking through it because no one said, bam, and slammed it together. We're slowly getting there because it's like, oh, Copilot, it already exists. Copilot. Give that 2 or 3 more iterations, and it's going to be doing the code thing that I was just talking about. That's not 20 years. That's more like 5 years, right? The self-driving cars with that. Tesla's not the only one pioneering in that space. You also have NVIDIA driving and Waymo and all sorts of other people. That's going to be a thing. It's already a thing. And you can say, it's not very good. And it's like 2 or 3 more iterations, and you're going to look silly driving as a human because the car is going to do it better than you. So I tell this to my wife. It's like, you think the pilot actually drives the plane? Nope. Airplanes have been automated for decades, right? You don't want the pilot to touch the steering wheel. The plane does better on its own. I mean, landing in a crosswind during an earthquake, it's like, let the plane do it. Spaceships, they land on their own. There's no human interaction there. There's no guy on a joystick, like in the movies. I got this. I'm going on manual. No, please don't. Right? So we're already there, but it's all over the place, so you don't see it. But it's becoming so ubiquitous that you're not going to be able to ignore it. And by the time you get there, it's like, yeah, it's already here. What are you talking about? So record yourself today and your wonder today, and say, what was I wondering would be the future and when it would come? And then 5 years from now, look back, right? And say, wow, some things came super fast. Some things are kind of still not here. We still don't have flying cars, thank God. But some things I didn't see at all. And that's the way life is, right? So that's how it's going to happen.
All right. So we have self-driving cars. We have, let's say, just low code, no code, just for the sake of it, Copilot. What's another interesting thing that you see that's going to be a game changer?
Well, those are big because the knock-on effects are you can't really understand or predict, but there's going to be simple things like we mentioned earlier, blockchain and NFTs. Okay, NFT, non-fungible token. It's nothing more than just saying you can identify a thing and it has an ID and it's the only one in the world. All right.
Sure.
Let's say we're going to eliminate if you've ever bought a house, you've gone through this whole process where there's an escrow account and there's a title company and there's inspectors and then there's the banks and there's all these parties involved. And you got to wonder, it's like, why does the title company exist? Because they're the ones that go and give you insurance to say, oh, we guarantee that this person who's trying to sell the house is the person who owns the house, right?
Right.
You can completely eliminate that if you have an NFT granted by the government that says this original home is owned by this person. And every time you sell or buy the house, that NFT's ownership changes. That's how NFTs work, right? By definition. You don't need the title company. You can just go look at the blockchain and see the chain of custody of that NFT, the title, right? You can see how many multiple people were on the title, when it was consolidated into one title, whatever. Everything is just on the blockchain. So a title search is nothing more than searching on the blockchain and saying, yep, looks like that guy owns it, right? The whole escrow process looks like a smart contract to me, right? It's like, you don't need the whole like, oh, I'm gonna wire transfer you the money and then you're gonna do this and they're gonna do that. And you don't need the escrow company. That's what they do. All they do is they're the one trusted entity that pulls everything together. And then once everything's together, they release the funds and they exchange the title and all that sort of stuff. That's a smart contract, right? It's just a piece of code. So once you do that, you've eliminated title companies, you've eliminated the escrow company. Your house closing can happen in days if the money's there, and all you're waiting on is inspections, right? Your insurance company's happy, all that sort of stuff. So you're going to transform complete industries like that with stuff that you're just kind of like, really, NFT? Who cares about NFTs, really, other than people speculating on random pieces of art? But this is what they're used for, and that's what's going to transform our society. And it's just going to happen slowly. You're going to buy your next house, and someone's going to say, your real estate agent is going to say, hey, we've got this automated process. We're going to close your house in 15 days. That company is going to get jacked up because it's like, wow, they close in 15 days, because they leverage this NFT technology and smart contracts. And then they're going to transform the whole real estate industry because everyone's going to have to do it that way, or else they're going to be left behind, right? So you're going to see stuff like that. And you saw this with things like Redfin and Zillow. They come along. We used to have an MLS, and only the agents had access to it. Then along comes Zillow. Bam! Everyone has access to homes. You don't need to go to an agent for that. So this is what's going to happen. You're going to see that in multiple industries where it's just like, huh, the technology can do that now? And then it's just going to be a bam. No one fanfared Zillow. Did you care that Zillow existed? It just kind of crept up on us. Now when you go do a search, you search on Zillow. And it happened within a 10 to 15 year period, and that's the end of it, right? So there's several technologies like that across our whole entire societies where it's just like, oh, well, that thing's just going to keep evolving, and eventually this is going to happen, right? Pick anything, just any area you could possibly imagine. It's like, okay, let's talk about how that's going to transform over the next 10 years. So
that's a great example, because you go from like Bored Ape Yacht Club, NFTs that are, selling for a crazy amount of money to actually now putting some legitimate purpose, because buying a house is just so, it doesn't make any sense, right? You got to wait for the money to come, and then you got to pay this, and then always something goes wrong. It's just,
and then in a place like the Caribbean, I bought a house in US Virgin Islands a number of years ago, and they have to go back to these books, 400 years that are originally written in Dutch, and they have to do this every single time. It's like, wow, once you automate that, you'll never have to do it again. Right? So it's things like that. And you've seen these kind of technological changes like that, where we have switchboard operators. Back in the 70s, we still had women in buildings pulling wires and sticking.
Murray Hill 527.
Right. Yeah, okay, Murray Hill. I'll just connect you. I mean, they're literally connecting you. And within a decade, they were gone because relay switches became dominant, and you didn't need them anymore. So within a decade, I remember as a child being concerned that all these relay operators were going to be gone, and they were gone in a decade. And we just moved on. So
I think that is an important thing to remember, right? Like right now on Blind, there is a lot of like kind of fear, uncertainty, right? Are these companies that I are paying me these high salaries, are they gonna last? Are they gonna survive? And I think it's
the answer is no.
Right. But like there will be something new, right? Like that's the lesson, and that's kind of the silver lining. Like, we don't have switchboard operators. We've automated it with technology, but that allowed a whole group of people to do something better and greater things, right?
Right. And we don't know what those greater and better things are, because we have whole industries that were birthed after we got rid of the switchboard operators, and half of those people probably went off and did those things. So it's net a positive to keep driving with technology, but we need that empathy piece, right? Because otherwise you're going to do technology for technology's sake, and humans don't win in that game, right?
I have to ask, like, touching on that empathy piece, right? Like, it is something that I see often on Blind. We have some great coders. excel at the kind of mechanical part that we're speaking about, right? And it's almost like these like interpersonal things that, perhaps I take for granted as a PR person, as a, so-called non-technical person.
And we ain't
you
so
know
good at.
where's that, like, where's that
It's
disconnect
just,
come from, you think? Like,
Where's
I
the
don't want to, like,
disconnect? Like,
well, I
why
think
am
you're
I?
trying to be very polite. I think you're trying, are you
Yeah,
trying to
no,
say
like, just
that,
like,
that
why, how does a group of people kind of get to this point where, oftentimes they get the feedback for like the reviews, they hit the ceiling because it's like, hey, great, like, you're a great coder, but how do you think about, global impact, or how do you think about cross-functional work? And that's where they struggle.
Look, you're still going to pay me 300 or 400,000 a year, even if I
Okay.
don't do that. So what are you talking about?
So in essence, it's fine if your level like caps out at like a senior software engineer at Microsoft, and you're making great
My
money
level
and you
caps
don't have
out at
to.
$500,000 a year. Do I care about the empathy you're talking about? You're selling me a fantasy. It's like, look, if you could just become a little more empathetic, we could give you 600,000 a year. It's like, no, I'll just stay the asset I am.
Okay.
I'll invest in the stock market and screw your extra 100,000 for your empathy. I don't need that, right? So I became a programmer because I'm a geek. I mean, I like to control the machine. I don't like the touchy-feely, interact with the human stuff. I can control the machine by doing this, typing.
But so then how do you get, to Rick's point, so how do you get the people to have the empathy to make sure everything doesn't run amok?
You don't. And
that's a problem then, no?
Hold on.
Yeah,
We, the programming class, who currently get the big salaries and drive the new companies and do all the nonsense, we're the dinosaurs. We may not cross the chasm. Some of us will and some of us won't. And there'll be a whole new class of people who know how to work with AIs, who work much faster than us, who have empathy, who have a community, who know how to interact and get support from a community. They're going to be the next level of us. So we're the dinosaurs hacking away, getting our 500K until we're not. We're the switchboard operators. Okay. And we're going to be
very well-paid switchboard operators.
We're the old switchboard operators, and our gravy train has come and it's about to leave. And if you aren't able to make that transition where you're more involved with human society, you're not going to make it. That's all there is to it. Because people who can do that and can do it in service of their society and their community, they're going to be the next big valued people. Because all the old values, like, we're about to hang up our picks and shovels because you don't need us digging in the ditches anymore, right? We got machines for that. So that's where we are right now, right? This moment, right? Or let's say it's slowly boiling over the next 5 years. We're right at that moment where the machine can program itself. And if we don't find new value through community engagement, all these other sorts of stuff, we're left behind, right? That's all there's to it.
So interesting, William. So Rick wrote a piece about with DoorDash. They had this policy where they wanted the Dashers to go out maybe once a month. Rick, what was it, like once a month to go out and deliver food and deliver what have you.
Yeah, great.
And it seems great. However, the backlash from the people on the site, oh my God, it was asking him to jump off your roof and fall on your head. They were so incensed that, how dare you ask me that? And it really
customer empathy, what the hell?
Exactly. Talk about lack of empathy.
That's what I'm talking about, right?
I've got all the empathy I need.
that's and it was so interesting because then there were comments where, well, wouldn't it make sense to do it because it can actually help you? Because then you would know, okay, if you're in a car and you get the beeps going on, or you're on the bike getting the beeps, maybe you realize that's not cool. You got to do something else and it'll be better. Nah. It was just like, how dare you?
No, it's always a burden. I mean, even going on call for live site issues in the data center, it's like, I don't want that. I want to automate that away. So it does not build empathy, it builds hatred. So just
Well,
remember,
it did actually. That was the feel. It was, yeah.
come on
You know
now.
what? Right,
I'm
right.
the
That really
geek.
was
I
like,
got into this because I don't want to do that kind of stuff. Now pay me.
yeah.
And soon enough, you're going to say, but the machine will do it better.
But what if the next generation is even worse? Let's say, like you're saying, like these dinosaurs could be over. But what if like the next crop is like even worse?
I don't know. The next crop is going to be very interesting and different. My daughter, I have an older daughter who's 27, and she's going through, she does Uber Eats every once in a while, delivery. And she's, tells me about how that economy works and what people her age think and what they think of the future and all this sort of stuff. They have different sets of goals than I had growing up in terms of how you pursue stuff and what's really important to you and all the rest. I don't think, will pursue stuff the way we have, but that's kind of like looking at future generations saying, God, these kids these days, they really don't want to get into the coal mines like we did. It's like, yeah, and they don't need
Those
to.
snowflakes, how dare they?
Right.
What a bunch of wimpy children these are. It's like, they don't need to get in the coal mines. That era's done, Grandpa. So I think they're going to tackle different problems because they're looking at the world and going, all right, you guys screwed it up. It's like, it's getting hot in here. You've destroyed the iceberg, so we're not going to have that vacation. So they've got, and the housing is too expensive. So they've got different concerns. They're going to come up with different solutions. They're going to be more powerful than we have been because they're going to be able to talk to the machinery more easily. So they're going to be able to articulate what they want and have the machinery around them do what they want easier than we have, right? We had to go in the coal mines, pound the steel, wrench the thing together, and then we can drive our muscle cars. They're gonna go, I want a muscle car to show up in 20 minutes because I want to go do this thing, and then I'm done with that, and then I'm on to this, and make sure the car is electric because I don't want to be adding heat to the world. It's a different conversation they're going to have, and it's going to be a different world. The fallacy is to think that they're going to do what we did. How are they going to do it? They're going to screw it up. It's like, no, they're going to do something different because their world is different, right? So forget that. They're not going to screw it up. They're going to do what they're going to do, right? And we're handing them a bunch of technology that they'll go, we got it from here.
I have two Gen Z kids, and I'd say like 19, 20 nephews and nieces, in kind of Gen Z, younger millennials. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. Their mindset is so different, but I think it's good. I mean, they've been through the financial crisis, all this toxic politics, going through COVID, getting, sent home from college, sent home from high school. So I think it's made them kind of hardy, but they definitely, and you don't want to generalize, but I do notice they're more about purpose, finding meaning in their job, finding fulfillment. You don't hear as much as I want to make this kind of money, but it's more of like, how can I make it? So to your point, I've seen that firsthand.
The money's not there. I mean, my poor daughter, she was living in the LA area, and she just came to this conclusion. It's like, there's no way to make it here. No matter how many side hustles you have, all your money goes to rent. So better to live in the country. So she moved up here to Washington State, and she's living on a farm. Because it's like, that doesn't work. She wised up. She's like, that doesn't work. So why should I pursue that?
Absolutely. Right? Yeah. New York City, anyway. They said $5,000 a month is like the average apartment.
Yeah. No,
I mean, so if you're a young person, you can't afford that.
I can't afford that.
It's ridiculous.
So I think the world is going to be different, and they're going to use the tools that we've created in different ways that we don't anticipate right now. I don't expect them to do what we've done, just like I said with the coal miners. It's like, their kids aren't going to go into the coal mines, and they shouldn't have to. Let's see what else they can do.
Do you have kind of this like last kind of parting wisdom that you want to share with this generation of technologists, our community on Blind?
Well, it's hard to say enough. I mean, the bottom line is, do what you're going to do. Be as cognizant and aware and have a purpose. We've provided as much tools as we can. It's your turn now. But you've got a lot more, you're going to have to lean more on your humanistic attributes and less on your finger pushing fast attributes, because if you don't, we're all doomed because the machines will kill us. So that's my parting wisdom is, be human or lose your humanity.
Thanks so much. Be human. Thanks, William.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Okay then.